You think you know when someone dislikes you. You think it's obvious. But what if I told you that the people closest to you, your friends, your family, your colleagues, might already hate you, and you have absolutely no idea? What if the signs have been there all along, hidden in plain sight, and you've been completely blind to them? Stay with me, because by the end of this video, you'll never look at human behavior the same way again. And more importantly, you'll discover the 7 psychological triggers that turn even your biggest supporters into secret enemies, triggers that Carl Jung spent decades uncovering in his revolutionary work on the human psyche. Carl Jung discovered something disturbing about human nature that most people refuse to accept. He found that beneath our conscious minds lies what he called the shadow, the dark, hidden parts of ourselves that we refuse to acknowledge. But here's what Jung didn't fully explore in his early work. How our shadows create invisible hatred toward others, and how this hatred operates like a psychological virus, spreading through relationships without anyone ever realizing they're infected. According to Carl Jung, we don't just repress our own darkness, we project it onto the people around us with surgical precision. And when this happens, something sinister begins to unfold in the unconscious theater of human relationships. Jung spent over 40 years studying patients who came to him confused about why their relationships were falling apart. They couldn't understand why people who once loved them had turned cold, distant, or hostile. What Jung discovered through thousands of hours of analysis was that most human hatred isn't born from obvious conflicts, it's born from unconscious psychological processes that operate below the threshold of awareness. But before I reveal the 7 triggers, let me ask you this. Have you ever noticed how someone's energy toward you changed, but they never said anything directly? Maybe they started taking longer to respond to your messages. Maybe their hugs felt different. Maybe they stopped making eye contact the same way. Keep that feeling in mind, because we're about to uncover exactly what happened in their unconscious mind. The truth is, most people will never tell you they've started to resent you. Why? Because they don't even realize it themselves. Carl Jung called this phenomenon unconscious compensation, the mind's ability to hide its true feelings not just from others, but from itself. The human psyche is incredibly skilled at creating elaborate justifications for feelings it doesn't want to acknowledge. Carl Jung said that envy is one of the most destructive forces in human relationships, yet it's also the most hidden. When you succeed, whether it's getting a promotion, finding love, losing weight, starting a business, or even just appearing genuinely happy, something dark awakens in the people around you, something Jung called the envious shadow. Here's what happens in their unconscious mind. According to Jung's research, your success becomes a mirror reflecting their failures, their unrealized potential, their abandoned dreams. And instead of celebrating you, their shadow begins to whisper poisonous thoughts. They don't deserve this. They got lucky. They think they're better than us now. Jung discovered that this process happens automatically and unconsciously. The person experiencing envy doesn't wake up one day and decide to hate you. Instead, their psyche begins a slow, methodical process of devaluation. They start noticing flaws in you they never saw before. They begin questioning your motives. They start finding reasons why your success isn't real or isn't earned. But here's the twisted part. And this is where it gets really psychological, they'll actually become more friendly to your face. Jung discovered this phenomenon in his patients repeatedly. The bigger the unconscious resentment, the more exaggerated the conscious politeness becomes. This is what Jung called reaction formation, when the unconscious mind is so threatened by its own feelings that it creates the opposite behavior on the surface. So if someone has suddenly become overly nice to you, overly complimentary, or overly interested in your life after a period of success, be very, very careful. Their shadow might be plotting against you. Jung documented case after case of patients who became excessively generous, kind, and supportive toward people they unconsciously despised. One patient brought expensive gifts to a friend she secretly resented for getting married before her. Another went out of his way to help a colleague he unconsciously hated for getting promoted. The conscious mind creates elaborate performances to hide what the shadow truly feels. According to Carl Jung, most people are unconsciously desperate for psychological control over others. They need to feel needed. They need to feel important in your emotional world. They need to believe that you can't function without their advice, their support, their validation. Jung called this psychological symbiosis, when two people become so enmeshed that one person's growth threatens the other person's sense of identity. In healthy relationships, both people encourage each other's independence. But in unconsciously codependent relationships, your growth becomes their crisis. When you start becoming emotionally independent, when you stop seeking their approval, when you stop sharing every problem with them, when you stop needing their constant validation, when you develop your own opinions and boundaries, something breaks inside them at an unconscious level. Your independence becomes their abandonment. Your strength becomes evidence of their weakness. Your growth becomes proof of their stagnation. And here's the scariest part, they will never admit this to themselves. Instead, their unconscious mind will start finding fault with everything you do. That new confidence you have. They'll call it arrogance. That peace you found. They'll say you've become distant and cold. That boundary you've set. They'll claim you've become selfish. That success you're enjoying. They'll insist you've forgotten where you came from. Carl Jung called this projection, when we take our own uncomfortable feelings and throw them onto someone else like a psychological hot potato. But when it happens to you, it feels like the whole world has gone crazy. You're becoming the best version of yourself, and suddenly everyone seems to have a problem with it. Jung spent years analyzing this pattern in his practice. He found that people who are threatened by others' emotional independence often have deep-seated fears of abandonment that date back to childhood. When you become less dependent on them, it triggers these ancient wounds, and their unconscious mind goes into survival mode. This is perhaps the most dangerous trigger of all, and Jung spent years studying this phenomenon in his practice. He called it the violation of the psychological contract. Every relationship has what psychologists call an unspoken contract, invisible rules about who you're supposed to be, how you're supposed to act, what role you're supposed to play in their life, and what function you're supposed to serve in their psychological ecosystem. Maybe you were always the friend who listened to their problems without sharing your own. Maybe you were the family member who never challenged authority or questioned family dynamics. Maybe you were the colleague who stayed in the background and made others look good. Maybe you were the partner who was always accommodating and never made demands. According to Carl Jung, these contracts aren't consciously negotiated, they develop unconsciously over time, and both parties begin to depend on them for psychological stability. But what happens when you break that contract? What happens when you stop playing the role they've assigned you? What happens when you start expressing opinions they don't like, or pursuing goals they don't understand, or developing parts of your personality that don't fit their image of who you should be? Their unconscious mind goes into panic mode. According to Carl Jung, this creates what he called psychological displacement. They feel like they're losing control of their world, and they blame you for the chaos. You're not just changing, you're threatening the entire structure of their psychological reality. Jung found that people often prefer predictable dysfunction to unpredictable growth. They would rather have you stay in a role that limits you than risk the uncertainty of you becoming someone they can't control or predict. Carl Jung discovered that one of the fastest ways to make someone secretly hate you is to reflect back to them parts of themselves they don't want to see. This happens more often than you might think, and it's almost always unconscious. When you start living authentically, setting boundaries, speaking your truth, or refusing to participate in toxic dynamics, you become a mirror that shows others their own compromises, their own lack of authenticity, their own failure to stand up for themselves. Jung called this shadow confrontation, and he found it to be one of the most threatening experiences for the human psyche. When someone sees in you the courage they lack, the boundaries they should set, the authenticity they've abandoned, or the self-respect they've never developed, it creates what Jung called psychological envy. A deep resentment towards someone who embodies what they wish they could be but are too afraid to become. This is why people often become hostile toward others who quit drinking when they know they should, who leave toxic relationships when they're stuck in their own, who pursue their dreams when they've given up on theirs, or who set boundaries when they've never learned how. Your growth becomes evidence of their stagnation. Your courage becomes proof of their cowardice. Your authenticity becomes a spotlight on their pretenses. And instead of using you as inspiration, their unconscious mind chooses to use you as a target. Jung documented countless cases of patients who became irrationally angry at friends or family members who had made positive changes in their lives. The conscious mind creates elaborate reasons why the other person's changes are wrong, dangerous, or selfish. But the unconscious truth is simpler. Seeing someone else's growth forces them to confront their own limitations. According to Carl Jung, relationships have psychological seasons, and most people are unconsciously terrified of autumn. They want every relationship to remain in permanent spring, even when the natural growth cycle demands change. When you outgrow someone, when your interests evolve, when your values shift, when your priorities change, when your conversation needs become more sophisticated, something profound happens in their unconscious mind. They don't just feel left behind, they feel betrayed. Jung called this developmental betrayal, the unconscious belief that growing beyond someone is an act of abandonment or superiority. Even though growth is natural and healthy, the person being outgrown often experiences it as a personal attack. Here's what makes this particularly painful: they'll often try to pull you back to their level rather than rise to meet you at yours. They'll reminisce about the good old days when you were different. They'll make jokes about your new interests or values. They'll try to engage you in old patterns of interaction that no longer serve you. And when you don't respond the way you used to, when you don't laugh at the same jokes, when you don't get excited about the same things, when you don't engage in the same types of conversations, they'll start to resent you for changing or thinking you're too good for them now. Jung found that this dynamic is especially common in families and long-term friendships. People become attached not just to you, but to the version of you that makes them feel comfortable about themselves. When you evolve beyond that version, they experience it as a loss, and loss often turns into anger. Carl Jung discovered that many relationships are built on what he called mutual shadow agreements. Unconscious pacts where people enable each other's dysfunctions, validate each other's excuses, and participate in each other's psychological avoidance. Maybe you used to listen to their complaints without challenging them to take action. Maybe you used to agree with their victim stories without pointing out their role in creating their problems. Maybe you used to participate in gossip, drama, or negative thinking patterns that made you both feel temporarily connected but ultimately drained. According to Jung, these shadow agreements create a false sense of intimacy and understanding. People feel close because they're sharing their darkness, but they're not actually helping each other grow or heal. But what happens when you stop participating in these agreements? What happens when you refuse to enable their complaining, their drama, their victim mentality, or their self-destructive patterns? What happens when you start responding to their problems with solutions instead of sympathy, with challenges instead of validation? Their unconscious mind interprets this as abandonment and betrayal. You're not just refusing to enable them, you're exposing the dysfunction they've been hiding from themselves. You're holding up a mirror that shows them how they've been contributing to their own problems. Jung found that people often prefer relationships that keep them stuck but feel supportive over relationships that challenge them to grow. When you stop being part of their psychological comfort zone, they'll often choose to make you the enemy rather than examine their own patterns. This might be the most disturbing trigger of all, and it's something Carl Jung observed repeatedly in his clinical practice: some people cannot tolerate others' genuine happiness. Jung called this happiness intolerance, and he found it to be more common than most people want to believe. When you find genuine contentment, inner peace, or authentic joy, it threatens people who are living in quiet desperation, chronic dissatisfaction, or emotional numbness. Your happiness becomes evidence of their misery. Your peace becomes proof of their chaos. Your joy becomes a spotlight on their emptiness. And instead of being inspired by your well-being, their unconscious mind chooses to be threatened by it. According to Jung, people who are genuinely miserable often surround themselves with others who are also struggling because it makes them feel normal. When someone in their circle breaks free from that collective misery and finds genuine happiness, it disrupts the entire system. They'll start questioning your happiness. What are you so happy about? They'll minimize your joy. Just wait, something bad will happen. They'll try to bring you back down. Remember when you were going through that hard time? They'll even create drama or problems to disturb your peace. Jung discovered that misery loves company not just because it wants support, but because it needs validation that happiness is impossible. When you prove that happiness is possible, some people will unconsciously try to destroy your proof rather than use it as a roadmap for their own healing. Carl Jung discovered that when people can't express their hatred directly, either because they don't recognize it consciously or because social norms prevent it, the hatred doesn't disappear. It goes underground and becomes what he called shadow aggression. This is much more sophisticated and dangerous than most people realize. Shadow aggression doesn't look like obvious hostility. It looks like concern, help, and even love. But underneath the surface, it's designed to undermine, diminish, and destroy. They'll start forgetting to invite you to things. Oh, I thought you were busy with your new life. They'll give you advice that seems helpful but is actually designed to undermine your confidence or sabotage your success. They'll share your private conversations with others, claiming they're worried about you or concerned about the changes they're seeing. They'll make subtle digs disguised as jokes. They'll bring up your past mistakes or failures in front of others. They'll question your decisions in ways that plant seeds of doubt. They'll offer help that comes with strings attached or makes you feel indebted and guilty. But here's what Jung found most disturbing: they genuinely believe they're being good people while they're doing all of this. Their conscious mind creates elaborate justifications for their shadow's behavior. They're not trying to hurt you, they're trying to help. They're not being jealous, they're being realistic. They're not undermining you, they're looking out for you. This is why you can never reason with someone who has turned against you in this way. You're not arguing with their logical mind, you're fighting against their unconscious hatred, and the unconscious doesn't respond to logic or evidence. According to Carl Jung, the human unconscious communicates through symbols, behaviors, and energy patterns that most people never notice. But once you know what to look for, the signs of hidden hatred become impossible to ignore. Watch their body language when you share good news. Do they lean back slightly, creating unconscious distance? Do their smiles reach their eyes, or do they look forced and mechanical? Do they change the subject quickly, as if your good news makes them uncomfortable? Do their congratulations sound genuine, or do they have a hollow, performative quality? Listen to how they talk about other people's successes. If they're constantly finding ways to diminish others' accomplishments, minimize others' achievements, or find the negative angle in every positive story, your turn is coming. Jung called this success intolerance, and it's a reliable predictor of how they'll respond to your own growth. Pay attention to their jokes about you. Jung discovered that humor is often the shadow's favorite weapon because it allows people to express hostility while maintaining plausible deniability. Those little digs disguised as playfulness. Those comments that make you feel bad but you can't quite explain why. Those teasing remarks that always seem to target your insecurities or achievements. That's their unconscious hatred leaking out through the socially acceptable channel of humor. Notice their energy around your boundaries. People who secretly resent you will constantly test your limits, push your boundaries, and try to make you feel guilty for having standards. They'll act as if your healthy boundaries are personal attacks on them. And here's the most chilling sign Jung identified: they start recruiting others to their side. They'll share concerns about you with mutual friends. They'll plant seeds of doubt about your character, your motives, or your mental state. They'll create a narrative where you're the problem, and they'll gather evidence to support that narrative by reinterpreting your past actions through the lens of their current resentment. Carl Jung said that most people would rather remain unconscious than face the darkness within themselves. It's easier to hate you than to examine why your growth threatens them. It's simpler to make you the villain than to acknowledge their own limitations, fears, or failures. But Jung discovered something even more profound: hidden hatred is often a mask for hidden grief. When people secretly resent you for growing, succeeding, or becoming happy, they're often grieving the death of who they thought you were, the end of the relationship they knew, or the loss of the role you used to play in their psychological ecosystem. According to Jung, this grief is especially intense when your growth forces them to confront their own unlived life. The dreams they abandoned, the risks they didn't take, the person they could have become but chose not to be. The tragedy is that they could use your transformation as inspiration for their own growth. They could let your courage give them permission to be brave. They could let your authenticity inspire their own honesty. They could let your happiness show them what's possible. But Jung found that most people choose the easier path, rather than do the difficult work of examining their own shadows and growing beyond their current limitations. They choose to remain stuck and make you the enemy for refusing to stay stuck with them. This is the moment everything changes for you. Instead of wondering what you did wrong, you start seeing their behavior for what it really is, a psychological defense mechanism protecting their fragile self-image from the threatening reality of your growth. You realize that their secret hatred is actually a twisted compliment. It means you've grown beyond the box they built for you in their mind. It means you've refused to stay small to make them feel big. It means you've chosen your own evolution over their comfort. According to Carl Jung, once you understand the shadow, you can never unsee it. This knowledge becomes your shield, but it also comes with responsibility. You cannot unknow what you now know about human nature. First, stop trying to win back people who have secretly turned against you. Jung discovered that trying to reason with someone's shadow only feeds it more power. The more you try to prove you're still the same person, the more evidence they'll find that you've changed in threatening ways. The more you try to reassure them of your good intentions, the more suspicious they'll become of your motives. Instead, Jung recommended what he called psychological detachment, quietly distancing yourself from their energy without drama, explanation, or confrontation. Don't make announcements. Don't have big conversations. Don't try to fix the relationship. Simply redirect your time, energy, and emotional investment toward people who can handle your growth. Second, recognize that not everyone can handle your evolution. Some people are only comfortable with the version of you that makes them feel superior, needed, or in control. When you outgrow that version, they'll try to pull you back down to their level rather than rise to meet you at yours. Jung called this developmental incompatibility, and he found it to be one of the most painful but necessary recognitions in human growth. Not everyone who was meant to be in your life forever is meant to be in your life forever. Some people are only meant to be part of your journey, not your destination. Third, and this is crucial, start paying attention to who celebrates your wins without hesitation, who supports your growth without conditions, who loves the person you're becoming as much as they loved the person you used to be. These are your real allies. Jung called them authentic relationships, connections based on genuine love rather than psychological need or unconscious contract. Carl Jung discovered something that goes against everything we're taught about relationships. Sometimes the kindest thing you can do is let people hate you. When you try to manage other people's emotions, when you dim your light to make them comfortable, when you shrink yourself to fit their expectations, when you sacrifice your growth to preserve their comfort, you're not being loving, you're being codependent. You're enabling their psychological stagnation and preventing both of you from growing. According to Jung, real love sometimes means disappointing people. Real friendship sometimes means outgrowing people. Real family sometimes means setting boundaries that others don't like. Real relationships sometimes mean letting others be upset with your choices rather than betraying yourself to keep them happy. Jung discovered that when you refuse to play small, when you continue to evolve despite others' resistance, when you choose your growth over their comfort, you're actually giving them an opportunity to grow too. You're showing them what's possible. You're demonstrating that change is achievable. You're proving that growth is worth the temporary discomfort it creates. Most of them won't take that opportunity. They'll choose to stay stuck in their resentment, their victim stories, their psychological comfort zones. But that's not your responsibility. Your job is to become who you're meant to be, not to manage other people's psychological comfort or emotional reactions. And here's the beautiful irony Jung observed in his practice. The moment you stop caring about their hidden hatred, the moment you stop trying to win back people who can't handle your growth, you become magnetic to the people who truly matter. You start attracting relationships based on who you really are rather than who you pretend to be. Carl Jung said that individuation, becoming your authentic self, is the most important journey of human life. But he also warned that this journey would cost you relationships with people who prefer the inauthentic version of you. This isn't a tragedy. It's a graduation. When you understand the psychology of hidden hatred, you stop being a victim of other people's shadows. You stop taking their projections personally. You stop trying to convince people to like the real you when they were only attached to the fake you. You stop sacrificing your authenticity to maintain relationships that require you to be someone you're not. Jung spent decades studying people who had undergone this transformation, and he found a consistent pattern. Initially, they felt lonely and misunderstood. But over time, they developed a quality he called authentic magnetism. The ability to attract people who could love them for who they really were rather than who they pretended to be. These new relationships felt completely different. There was no walking on eggshells. No hidden agendas. No secret resentments brewing beneath polite smiles. No elaborate performances to maintain others' approval. No fear that being yourself would drive people away, because the people who belonged in their lives were actually drawn to their authenticity. Jung called this psychological alignment, when your inner reality matches your outer relationships. When the people in your life love the real you, not the version of you that makes them comfortable. But this transformation requires what Jung called psychological courage, the willingness to be disliked by some people in order to be genuinely loved by others. The willingness to lose relationships that require you to be fake in order to gain relationships that celebrate your authenticity. According to Carl Jung, understanding the shadow isn't just about protecting yourself from others, it's about recognizing these same patterns within yourself. The capacity to see hidden hatred in others exists because you understand how it feels to harbor it yourself. Have you ever felt that flash of irritation when someone you know succeeded beyond your own achievements? Have you ever found yourself being overly critical of someone who seemed too confident or too happy? Have you ever felt abandoned when someone you cared about started needing you less? Have you ever resented someone for growing in ways that made you feel left behind? Jung discovered that we can only see in others what exists within ourselves. If you can recognize hidden hatred in others, it's because your own shadow contains the capacity for the same feelings. This isn't something to be ashamed of, it's something to be conscious of. The shadow exists in everyone. The question isn't whether you have one, but whether you'll acknowledge it and work with it consciously, or let it control you unconsciously. The people who secretly hate you. They've chosen unconsciousness. They've let their shadows run their relationships, their decisions, and their emotional lives. Don't make the same mistake. When you feel those flashes of envy, resentment, or threatened by someone else's growth, acknowledge those feelings. Examine them. Understand what they're telling you about your own fears, limitations, or unlived dreams. Use them as information rather than letting them turn into unconscious hatred. Jung found that people who could acknowledge their shadows consciously were far less likely to project them onto others unconsciously. They could feel envy without acting on it. They could feel threatened without becoming threatening. They could feel uncomfortable with others' growth without trying to sabotage it. Carl Jung spent his entire career studying human psychology, and he came to a startling conclusion that most people still refuse to accept: most people are not who they appear to be, even to themselves. The colleague who seems supportive might be unconsciously sabotaging you. The friend who acts concerned might be secretly pleased by your struggles. The family member who says they want the best for you might be terrified of your success. The partner who claims to love you might be threatened by your growth. But here's what Jung discovered that changes everything. Once you see this clearly, once you understand the psychology of hidden hatred, once you recognize the 7 triggers that turn love into resentment, you become free. Free from the need to be liked by people who can't handle your growth. Free from the exhaustion of managing other people's emotions. Free from the confusion of wondering why relationships feel so complicated. Free from the self-doubt that comes from internalizing others' projections. You start operating from a place of clarity rather than confusion. You start choosing your relationships based on genuine compatibility rather than psychological convenience. You start surrounding yourself with people who aren't threatened by your light, who don't need you to stay small so they can feel big, whose own growth allows them to celebrate yours. Jung called this authentic living, when your relationships support your growth rather than requiring you to sacrifice it. When the people in your life love your evolution rather than resenting it. When you're free to become who you're meant to be without fear of losing those who truly matter. So let me ask you one final time, are there people in your life who might secretly resent you? People whose energy has shifted in ways you couldn't quite explain. People who seem supportive on the surface but feel different underneath? According to Carl Jung, the answer is almost certainly yes. But now you have the tools to see it clearly, protect yourself effectively, and most importantly, stop taking it personally. Remember, their hidden hatred is not about you. It's about their relationship with their own shadow. It's about their fear of growth, their need for control, their unconscious commitment to staying small, their inability to face their own limitations. Your job is not to fix them, convince them, or win them back. Your job is to continue becoming who you're meant to be, regardless of who can't handle that transformation. Carl Jung said it best, the privilege of a lifetime is to become who you truly are. Don't let anyone's secret hatred rob you of that privilege. Some people are only meant to be in your life for a season. When that season ends, let them go with gratitude for what they taught you about human nature, about psychology, and most importantly, about yourself. The people who belong in your future will celebrate your growth, not secretly resent it. Trust Jung's wisdom, authenticity attracts authenticity, and shadows attract shadows. Choose your side wisely. Thank you so much for staying with me through this exploration. If you found value in today's discussion, don't forget to subscribe to the channel and share this video with someone who might benefit from it. And if you'd like to go a step further in supporting this work, you can now leave a super thanks below. It's a small way to say thank you, and it truly helps keep this channel going.